Are you seeing what I'm seeing?
Yep.
Okay, awesome.
We don't know what you're saying, but we're saying something that WeBWorK exam.
You're seeing something? I think that's going to be good enough.
So that's good enough. Yeah. Okay.
All right, well, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to talk about our big project from the spring. So I'm sorry I had to skip most of today's talks, but I was here for the first part of the panel discussion, and I really liked some of the things that that our panelists were discussing as part of what we did in the spring and like what we learned from it. So I'll talk about the exams that we created at City Tech for our calculus sequence, and it really was an odyssey, and I'm going to try to like communicate that, although like nobody's going to be surprised that this was definitely a huge amount of work. How do I even advance? Oh, okay, I did it. All right. So in the beginning, in like just after the before times was March 2020 when we got sent home, and you know, like everyone's departments, it was just like utter chaos. So at some point, our chair was like, okay, we need a final exam task force. And somehow, I don't know why, I volunteered to spearhead the final exam task force. And so we got some other, weren't quite volunteers, I would say, but people who were voluntold to participate in the task force. So this was our task force. Andrew had no choice because he's our WeBWorK human, so he didn't have a choice. And Sandy is our department chair. So that was our final exam task force. So those were the people who were tasked with just like figuring out what to do. So a lot of what the final exam task force had to do was brainstorm and just like, try to figure it out. And of course, most of that was freaking out, as you guys all, I'm sure, did yourselves. And eventually we did manage to make some decisions, and eventually we did manage to get to work. So I'm really going to focus on 3 and 4 for this presentation. But like, what did the brainstorming look like? And these are, I know, questions that have already come up today. Like, big question was, how do we balance academic integrity with student privacy? That was really, really what we felt like was our challenge. But like, this was New York in April. So really the bigger question was like, how do we support our students' academic goals while the world is burning around them? Like, this was like super, super raw here. So we wanted to, not try to overdo it, but we wanted to, do what we needed to do, what we felt we needed to do for our students, even though we didn't know what that was yet. So our technical questions, will we be back on campus by exam week? Because at first we didn't know like what could possibly be happening. So of course, here we are. That's not what happened. We wondered, could we give incompletes and have students come back in the summer to take their in-person exams? So no, that's like, took us a while to figure out. The answers were no. Can we proctor exams over Zoom? I know that some instructors wanted to do that. The people on the task force were super uncomfortable with those and with proctoring software just for matters of privacy for our students. So then we started talking about, can we give take-home exams? Our courses were not designed to have take-home exams. The exams that we have for these courses were really meant to be done in person. So that was a bit tricky. And we heard rumors of other departments who were just like, screw it, we're not giving exams. Like, we're gonna solve the problem by like not solving the problem. And like, more power to them, I totally get it. I think that was a completely appropriate response to the problem that was there. We kept expecting that someone would tell us what to do. At some point, maybe we'll get some guidance, and eventually we're like, okay, this isn't happening. It's just us, like we're on our own. We gotta just do this. So then we were like, okay, after all of that, what is going to give us the most flexibility? I think Shirley was talking about flexibility this morning, but also what is going to give our students the most flexibility? Like suddenly, I had a student last semester who worked at a gas station. She was an essential worker. She was suddenly working way more than she was pre-pandemic. So she would call into Zoom classes from work sometimes. So like, what's going to work for a student like that? What's going to work for a student who's like taking care of their little brother all day, who's like doing his own Zoom classes? And also just like, what is possible? And that's really where Andrew comes in. Yeah, this was what our brainstorming sessions were like, as I'm sure you recall from April. All right, so I'm this is a dense slide, but I'm kind of amazed that I managed to get all of this onto one slide, given like what it took to get here. So we decided we would give final exams, and that they would be uniform final exams. So usually for our uniform final exams, they're given in the last class meeting period. So those exams are given at different times. So we already have different versions of the exams that are given at different times. So there is sort of like precedent for having literally different questions on different versions of the exam. So we decided, and I'll get more into this later, we decided to use the WeBWorK Gateway Quiz feature, which I didn't even know about until Andrew told us, with a large test bank. So the decisions that we made in terms of practicalities, with the Gateway Quiz feature, you can set a timer. So the exam is open for us. The exam was open for 2 days, for a full 48 hours, 2 calendar days. And the students could decide when they had a two-hour window that they could take their exam. And so they would log into WeBWorK and they would click take test, and it would start their 2-hour timer. And just like we were just talking about that, we don't at this point have a way to upload written work to WeBWorK. So individual instructors negotiated with their students how to share their written work. And they would get a 30-minute window after their WeBWorK exam closed to upload their written work. We did not have Readerly in the spring as much as we wanted them. So we were hosting this on our own server at City Tech. So we were throwing traffic at it that like we had never done before. So we worked really hard to figure out which dates for the 4 courses that we had here that would minimize the traffic on the server. Oh, maybe I'll say that for these 4 courses, like we have Andrew. So we've had WeBWorK at City Tech for some time. And these are our highest enrollment courses. So this is like a few thousand students. And not every instructor was using WeBWorK for homework at this point, but a lot were. Like we had been in these 4 courses in particular, we already had like a culture of WeBWorK, even if everyone wasn't participating. So that made it sort of like a slightly less crazy idea to try to give the final exam in this way. In the Gateway Quiz feature, students don't get to check their individual answers like they do in homework, but they can check the whole test. So we're giving them 2 tries. So for example, if they enter a typo and then they can catch it with their first try and then correct it for their second try. We decided that this is part of the flexibility side of things, that we would set it so that as long as the 2-day exam window was still open, that students could take a second version of the exam after 24 hours. So if the exam window is a Thursday and a Friday, and if a student takes their first version of the exam at 8 p.m. on Thursday, at 8 p.m. on Friday, they could take a second version if they wanted to. And the idea here was like, we were trying to understand just like the settings in which our students were taking these exams. Like anything could happen with like an internet interruption. The 2-hour timer keeps counting even if students log out of WeBWorK. So like an internet interruption or like an emergency with a little kid, something could happen. And we wanted to alleviate the stress from the students of like, what if something happens while I'm taking the exam, but also like not deal with like 1,000 individual problems. So that's why we made it so that students could take a second version after 24 hours. And we decided, if they learn something between the first version and the second version, like awesome, great. As I joined, we were talking about how some instructors were conducting these post-exam oral interviews, which was just like another layer, which was optional for instructors, but like I think actually really, really good. So good that I'm doing it every week this semester. And also another part of this that was important for us in terms of flexibility is that instructors could opt out of the uniform option. Like if they had something that they were doing in their classes and they thought it was working, they didn't have to accept what we were offering. They just had to get approval from their course coordinator that this was an appropriate, way of addressing the final exam. And some people opted out, but like I would say like 90% or so of our around 100-ish instructors opted into using the final exam option, our uniform option. Another really important part of this was just onboarding students to the platform. And I don't mean just the WeBWorK platform, but the idea of taking an exam in WeBWorK. So something like having the countdown clock, something like having all the questions on the same page. So a really, really important part of what we did was we made practice exams that we assigned to students about 2 weeks before the exam date with all the same parameters. They could get a new practice exam every 24 hours. Every exam they could check twice. So just not just so that they could see the content, because that was sort of like less important than just like getting them used to using the system in this way. And yeah, like I said, like I can't believe I like fit all of this onto one slide. It's like we considered, the task force considered every other possibility before we like finally narrowed down on like these decisions. And maybe I can say I have a link here to a memo that we sent to instructors trying to explain just like how this was working, like what we were offering. And I don't think anyone should read this memo at all. I just wanted to emphasize that it's 7 pages of like dense text. So we really spent a lot of time communicating with instructors about like what we were offering and how it was going to go. Andrew and I held a few Q&A sessions that were like a few hours each. And that was a really important part of this, was just communicating with instructors like what to expect from this like weird situation. So what am I doing? Back. Okay. So that was that side. Okay. So here, here's what it looks like on the student side. And let me actually click here and log in to this class to show you. So this is my current Math 1575 Calculus 2 class. And I've assigned myself a test here, a display test. So this is what it looks like for a student. A test has not been generated for me yet. I have to click on this to make that happen. And as soon as I do, now it's generated a test for me, and you can see I have only 2 hours to do it. And after 2 hours, I won't be able to submit anything. I can save any of my entries by clicking preview, but that doesn't check the individual answer. And down here at the bottom of the page, I have grade test. So maybe if I'll do like 26, grade test. And this has told me that, oh, it's no surprise I have 0 out of 8 on this test. And if I had entered that correctly, this would have lit up as green. But if I click grade test again, that ends my test. So I'm done. Like I don't get any more time to enter answers into WeBWorK. This is my grade in WeBWorK. So that's, like I said, like if your students are used to taking WeBWorK for homework, that's sort of like a first level to onboarding them to the platform. But just that is very different from taking homework in WeBWorK. So we wanted them to see that ahead of time. Wait a second. Oh, the instructor side. So like I said, I had never even heard of Gateway Quiz before the spring. And Andrew put together some nice YouTube videos to tell us how to implement this. What does it look like for the instructor? So you may have seen this. I don't know what Andrew showed you earlier today, but I know a lot of you are familiar at least with assigning like homework sets. So you get options like this, but when you choose Gateway Quiz, you get like way more options. So this corresponds with the decisions that the task force made. So this is your 2-hour time limit. This was something that I didn't think of, but of course, Andrew knew everything ahead of time. Do we want to cap the test time at the close date? So this close date is tonight at 11:59 p.m. If I have a student who's taking the exam at that time, do we want WeBWorK to just cut them off? And we decided no, because remember, we were hosting this and we wanted to spread out the traffic. So as long as a student has started the exam by the close date, they still get their full 120 minutes. The number of graded session submissions per test was 2. So that's where they can click grade test twice before it just ends the test. And we had decided to make our interval between new versions of the test 24 hours. So, so that's what that 1440 is. And how many tests do they get in that 24-hour interval? Just one. like ordering the numbers randomly. I feel like that's helpful for trying to generate like unique looking exams. And I do like to have the scores on finished assignments. So students are getting that feedback, even though this is an exam kind of assessment. But yeah, so that was all those decisions. Like this was our decisions that we made. We still had no exams, right? Like we still didn't have any content like whatsoever. So that's why we had to do a little bit more freaking out because now it was probably like mid or late April and like our exams are like mid to late May and we had, we're starting at 0. Yeah, like I said, we decided to focus on these 4 courses in our calculus sequence because we already had like WeBWorK kind of going on with them. But we needed teams in order to start generating exam questions. So the course coordinators for the courses or other volunteers had to lead each course's effort. So we had these 4 exams. And we had to recruit teams to generate the question banks. And this was huge. Like all of you remember how intense the spring was. And suddenly we were just asking a bunch of people, including people who are here, like, hey, actually, could you also take on this giant, really important critical assignment on a short timeline? And I have to say that everyone who was involved in this was just like such a team player, like so committed, like so motivated. So that part made it like less awful than it definitely could have been. People worked really, really, really hard on this. And so we ended up with like 2 to 6 members. Like it was just like whoever can do what, just go, just do it, just start. And so the teams operated like really, really differently in terms of the exam creation. But the structure was relatively uniform from course to course. So each exam was loosely based on existing exams from previous semesters, so our paper exams. So our exams always, for these courses, always have 10 questions, exactly 10 questions. But for some of them, a question might be split into 2 parts, like a part A and a part B. And if they're 2 short parts, they might have nothing to do with each other. So maybe our exams have 15 questions sometimes. But we actually cut this down to just 10 questions, like no multiple parts. Like we're not gonna like put any more stress on our students than we really need to right now. So the exams ended up being like a little bit shorter, which I thought they were too long anyway. So I was pretty happy with that. And we do have final exam review sheets for each of these courses. And we basically had to like stick with those as a model because that is the communication that the department has had with instructors about the content you can expect to appear on a final exam. So that's like, this was our starting point. And so we had 4 teams and the approaches were like actually quite different. So for pre-calculus, and this was just like really up to the teams, just like, we told them, go do whatever you can, let's communicate so that we figure out like what works best as we're going. So for pre-calculus, I included a link to the final exam review sheet here. So this is like on the department webpage. It says revised fall 2019. I bet it hasn't been updated in like 30 years, really. Like, like this has been pretty fixed for a long time. But again, like this is one of the ways that the department communicates with instructors what we expect to put on the final exam. So it's not like a practice exam. It's just like a list of review questions. So what Thomas Tradler is our course coordinator for pre-calculus, and this was like kind of amazing. So Thomas, awesome, totally awesome, has been teaching pre-calculus, I don't know, his whole life, like forever. He wrote the textbook for the class. Never used WeBWorK. I think maybe about a year ago, he was like, well, I guess like so many of my instructors are using WeBWorK and like Kate and Andrew keep bothering me about it. So maybe I should pay attention to what's on our existing WeBWorK homework sets. So that's what Andrew and Thomas were working on, I guess like last fall, maybe the spring before we got sent home, it was like the first time Thomas had ever like looked at WeBWorK. And then we got sent home and everyone's freaking out. And we finally make these decisions and we're like Thomas was like, great, okay, let's do this. He was very enthusiastic. And Andrew, maybe you remember there was like one, I think it was a weekend where like somehow you and I were talking and he and I were talking. We were like, okay, let's just go on Zoom. And Andrew took us through like a bare bones like problem authoring, like personal tutorial session just for the two of us. And by the end of the weekend, Thomas had coded like all of the questions that were on the final exam review sheet and turned them into WeBWorK questions. It was like the like steepest like adoption curve, like literally ever. I was like, I can barely author a problem, you know, and here you are. So that was one approach, was starting with the final exam review sheet. Another approach, which the Calculus 1 team took, was looking at existing problems. So what they did was they just went through the existing problems, I think from the course, but maybe also in the open problem library, I'm not exactly sure. But they just grabbed everything that they liked. Like this was their starting point. So their starting point had 94 questions. Right, so cool. Like just completely different, like opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of like where you're going to start. So of course, if you're doing something like that, you have to be as very organized. So this is their private communication. And if you can see, I'm trying to move things so I can actually, there we go. So you can kind of see here for every single question that they were putting on their like 94 question list, they had to have a conversation about every single question. So this was where the team was like having their communication. You can see, no, not on final exam review sheet, take it off. So that, you know, that was what they had to do to sort of like narrow things down. The other two teams, and I was on the Calculus 2 team, so I can say a little bit more about that. We kind of did something in between. Like we kind of started with a bunch of existing questions. And then we were like, well, we have this final exam review sheet and the match is sort of like not perfect. And we do want instructors to like know what to expect. And we do want the students to know what to expect based on the final exam review sheet. So we kind of started with a big list and then ended up writing a bunch of questions ourselves. So this was our private communication. So we were doing like a lot of just like alignment stuff, like what can we use, what do we need help with, and so on. So I don't know which method is best, but it's just what happened, you know. And we went through many rounds and like, you know, lots and lots of help from Andrew because we were authoring questions without ever really having done it before. I mean, Thomas's were perfect because he's he can do that. But yeah, this was ended up being like a lot of work, and Andrew was on every single team. But Maria Besanoff really wanted to emphasize how important the randomization was in terms of like what we were doing and what we were expecting. So she did some calculations for us just to say like, okay, how big do our question banks need to be? If we really want to say something like, oh, the probability that two students will have exactly the same exam is like so low, like she was really helping us like understand what we were trying to say by that. So different ways of randomizing. So that's like really like what the rest of the talk is going to be about. So there are different ways of randomizing, and I know that like Andrew's taken people through like problem authoring, so maybe you've seen some of this already. This is actually from a PreCalculus question that Thomas wrote. So I think when Thomas first like spent that weekend just like coding up all the problems on the final exam review sheet, I don't think he had any randomization at all. I think he just took the numbers from the final exam review sheet and put them in. And he did that so quickly so that he was able to like then add extra layers of randomization. So this is just a chunk of his code, and I focused on this part here. So this was actually, let me, do I have this question? What did I link to? I forget. So here's the question as it looks in WeBWorK. So you're solving a quadratic inequality. So he's got roots of the quadratic equation, and he's forming his coefficients, and he's got his polynomial built from these randomized parameters. So already that's building in some randomization that will generate different questions for different students. So that's there in the code, but he also has put in these cases for different versions. So he has 4 different versions of this question where the inequality is different. So now he's building in randomization, not just with like certain numbers that are in the question, but even with like other symbols. So I said, watch out for weird edge cases. I mean, Andrew probably mentioned stuff like this. Like we were messing up a lot. We were just like, oh, well, like our parameters are kind of bad and the denominator's 0. So we had to, like, we were starting there with our problem authoring. So we came a long way from there. Oh, and I couldn't find, I was looking for this last night and I was asking Andrew and he also didn't know what I was talking about, but I had this vague memory of a question that we had stolen from him for the Calculus 2 exam that used like the versions here, but for the versions, it was literally different integrals. So this is inside a question. He had generated like different integrands for students to integrate. I think it was an integration by parts question. So I just put this slide here to say that, like, even though I don't have a picture of it because I can't find it in our giant mess from the spring, I remember being like, I was like, whoa, you could do that? Cool. Thanks, Andrew, for doing that for us in the past. So that was like the one level of randomization is like internal to a question. Like in a question's code, you've got some different choices for how to generate more problems based on one template. But the second part of randomization, I definitely didn't know about before the spring. And this was, I think, one of the features that made what we were doing possible, to have like really a lot of different versions of the exam for our students. So what I'm gonna do here, when you are creating a gateway quiz, I have it here, yeah. So usually, like if you're, sorry, let me start over. If you're creating a homework set in WeBWorK, usually in the source file, you would just have like the path name and a file name of the question that you are working on. But here you can see that I've got this warning, problem source is drawn from a grouping set. So we had a homework set called test 1 bucket 1, test 1 bucket 2, and so on. And each of these is a homework set. So if I go to test 1 bucket 1, let's see if I can find it in my giant, this is like a little bit embarrassing. It's like seeing someone's desktop, but it's like really cluttered. I'll take best test 1 bucket 6 is good enough. So test 1 bucket 6 is a homework set that's assigned just to me, not to my students. And it has 6 questions in it. So if I go back to my test 1, I have each of these consists of a set of questions. And when WeBWorK generates a gateway quiz for a student, it's going to choose 1 question from this set at random. So that's another layer of randomization. The question itself has randomized parameters, and then which question gets assigned as a student's question number 1 is randomized by choosing from a set. So I think actually that Calculus 1 where they started with like 94 questions, they were actually really good questions. I don't know if all 94 were, but they had actually really big buckets because Maria was in charge, and so she knew about like we need these like really big question banks. So that's the end. Oh yeah, the end. We gave our exams and I can't believe it worked. Thank you very much. Are there any questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Or a suggestion.
Mm-hmm.
Just.
Daniel, I remember you.
Hi. So when you make the quiz, when you set the quiz options, I think the one before the last option is show scores on finished assignments. I originally turned that to yes, but at one point, then I realized that should be a no. And let me give you an example why. Students take a test with that option set to yes. Students complain something went wrong with WeBWorK. I can't verify that, right? Whatever that may be. And they said, oh, well, the score on the WeBWorK is incorrect. Some, wasn't graded properly, so on and so forth. Now, I asked the students to also, aside from the test, I asked the students to submit a worksheet where they show all the work, right? But if the students see the correct answers, then they could actually change these answers before they submit the worksheet. So I would probably set that to no, and have the students upload. I mean, they would email me the stuff, but now I use the Blackboard turn it in option.
We've learned about accepting written work over email at this point, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's just.
Yeah,
I mean, I teach computer science class, and over there it's just like crazy because we don't have WeBWorK.
I feel like of the decisions we've made, this is not one that I'm like super passionate about. So I see what you're saying. For me in my classes, the WeBWorK score is not counting at all. So this is maybe orthogonal to exactly what you were saying, but like I don't want them to think about like entering the right answer into WeBWorK. I know some instructors are counting the WeBWorK score for some portion of the test grade. I'm not. I'm just written work and interviews. So for me, this is like a little bit of a crutch for the students. If you want to check your work, go for it. If you don't, like I think about this as a question delivery system. If they want to check their work, then they can, but they don't have to. So I don't I kind of feel like they could reverse engineer from the right answer. And like, I don't know, I feel like that bothers me a lot less now than it did when we were first starting this. I'm like, you go, okay, I'm going to interview about it. So, okay.
And if you're going to interview, when you're going to do that? That was another question. When you're going to interview if you have a lot?
I usually interview my students the week after they take their test.
Mm-hmm. Do you use office hours for that?
I have a big sign-up sheet. So no, I do it outside of class time and outside of office hours time.
Okay. Thank you.
It's extremely time consuming.
Yeah.
Kate, may I ask you a question, please?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. In your WeBWorK, you said when you assign to students, you don't assign any scores or any credit for them doing it. So what is the motivation? I mean, I know these are advanced students, they should be doing it, but what is the motivation for them to actually do the work other than for me to prep or to prepare for the class lecture?
Sorry. Okay, I think that I've said something confusing. So for homework on WeBWorK, that counts towards their grade for my class. It's only for exams, like the stuff that we just showed, that I tell them it's their written work and the interview that matters to me, and their actual answer in WeBWorK does not matter to me at all. And so one of the reasons I do that is like an academic integrity kind of issue. Like, sure, you can look up anything you want, put it into WeBWorK and get credit for it, and like nothing has happened. So so it's partly that, like I don't want to give any credit for that, but I'm also seeing it as like for exams, a question delivery system with the option to check if you want. For homework, absolutely, I'm using WeBWorK scores as usual.
Yeah, that was my concern. I mean, during the exam is okay because, I mean, showing your work and making sure that you know how to do the problem is important. But for homework assignment, I think, they should get something back.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for me, it's only for the final exam or for exams that I'm not counting the WeBWorK score.
Okay. Thank you.
Kate, can I ask a question?
Please.
I'm very curious about your post-WeBWorK interviews with 4,000 students, you said?
Yeah, so this is not something that is going to be practical for everybody at all. I did it in Calc 2. I had, including the final exam, I think I had 3 exams in the spring, and I only did it for students on the first at-home test where I thought they had cheated. And it was like extremely unpleasant to be like, you cheated and you have to prove that you didn't cheat. And you know what? All of you were cheaters and you all have to do the interview with me next time. And so the next round of interviews, everyone had to do it. And yeah, it's extremely, extremely time consuming for that week. It's about 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes per student. But that was where I realized like, oh, actually, this is good. Like what's happening here, they're actually explaining their thinking. They've never had to say these words out loud before. And like, I can tell better why they wrote something weird or when they knew something was working. So for me, it was like that relationship was extremely powerful. And so by the time we got to the final exam, we had sort of like worked out how we do it. But that was a decision individual instructors made. I'm teaching 2 courses this semester, and I'm doing it for one of my courses. It's every week. It was so good that I.
How do you schedule? How do you schedule in a large class? How do you get?
So I can. So for our, this is another thing for our classes. We have 30 to 40 students. So that's what I'm doing every week. If you had something different.
I have 350.
So.
Yeah, Edward, you have to understand Kate has no dog. So it's okay. So she'll be able to do that. Right, Kate?
I have no what?
Dog.
No life, no hobbies, right?
Oh, no.
Cats.
This is what I'm doing.
She has cats.
I have cats. Cat. This is what I'm doing this semester. So, you know, if you have a course with 300 students, I hope you have some TAs who do some grading. I doubt that you can like ask them to spend all this time on it. What it looks like for me this semester, do I have, is it here? Where is it? This is the embarrassing part where you see how many tabs I have open and I can't find anything.
So while Kate is pulling it up, I'll also like kind of put a plug for the oral interview. I, like Kate, did them last semester and I continue to do them this semester, and I find them essential to checking in, knowing who my students are, hearing about their issues. They open up to me if they're struggling with something. Even if it's just a 10-minute interview, we spend the first, say, 3-4 minutes talking math, and the rest of the time I ask, how are you doing? Are you working on your homework? Are you having issues? And just having that personal check-in has been transformative. And, you know, this is something, again, I found that I've really taken to, and I hope to continue it even beyond, you know, the remote learning structure.
Yeah, I want to figure it out too, because it's been so powerful. Like I have connections with all of these students now. So this is what my week looks like. If they have a standing appointment with me this semester. So even so, when I'm doing the post-test interviews, they already have their appointment with me. When I have tests in both of my classes and I'm interviewing like 50 to 60 students per week, that's definitely a lot. But this is all outside of class time. So I think one of our colleagues, Samar, she's doing a version of this, but she's split her course into modules. So she's only conducting the interviews at the end of a module. Yeah, I don't know how this could scale up. Like, I can barely do it with this many students. But it is really, really good. And this is why I made this decision for this semester, because in the end, last semester was just a really fantastic experience, I think, for me and for the students. And my students are going hard on it this semester. Like they're doing a great job. They give me a presentation every week, and I'm using WeBWorK to deliver presentation questions to them. So they each have a portfolio of questions that they're working through. So I feel like we're like way over time now, but am I the one who has to worry about that?
No, I mean, Kate, you're doing great. I mean, for oral, I'm just playing with you. I do oral examination with my student as well. It's very time consuming, but at least you get the benefit that you get there. The enjoyment of seeing your student being able to articulate what they are learning is very rewarding. I think it's a great thing.
It really is, and like with his weekly presentations, it's amazing how much they've grown in this time. Like I feel like a proud mom, like it's amazing.
Thank you so much, Kate. And so, like you said, we're so thrilled. We have, hours more of questions for you, but unfortunately we need to move on. I put Kate's email address in here, Kate Poirier at citytech.cuny.edu. If you have questions for her, please feel free to reach out to her, reach out to us. We're happy to continue the conversation. So now we're going to move on and hear from Jake at Readily, and he and his engineers are going to be talking about, stress testing, contingency planning. We had questions about server capacity, RAM capacity. How does this all work without crashing? So they'll talk about that. Bianca from Queensborough, Bianca Sosnovsky from Queensborough, she'll be joining as well to chime in.
Perfect, thanks. That was great. That's such an interesting presentation. So yeah, kind of go